many developers are working on Lightning right now? It's got to be thousands in terms of Lightning apps.
Oh, on the apps? I'm not sure. It's not a huge number.
Not the Lightning like protocols, but like people just building stuff. I see like conferences now and lots of activity on GitHub like regarding Lightning Network apps and people that are seemingly building lots of stuff. Like it feels like it's starting to catch up to Ethereum app developers, but not quite to that level.
I think a lot of the people who are developing are kind of like coming from that world, because those kind of like economies of just print a bunch of tokens and then make your money by printing money, that's kind of like not working anymore, or it's slowing down. And, they're interested in, new opportunities. I see a lot of people like moving away from that kind of model.
Lightning provided a place for those young developers that aren't like anarchists or libertarians or whatever. They're just like interested in coding stuff.
Yeah.
And Ethereum got there first, and the ICO bubble sort of like exacerbated that. And, Ethereum's developer community is this like unicorns and friendliness and all that stuff, which attracted a lot of young people that weren't really thinking about this from the monetary perspective. They were thinking about it from like, I'm just going to build stuff.
It made it seem like easier than it really was. Like once you can print money, you just feel like, oh, it doesn't even matter if I don't have users because I'm just printing money.
Yeah.
That doesn't last forever.
Well, that like as Ethereum started to become a bit more contentious, like the community and people started to argue about how to scale and whether Ethereum is money or not, like you started to see the same sort of things happening in Bitcoin Twitter, happening in Ethereum Twitter, where they're arguing with each other and decide like figuring out, wait a second, it's not all just rainbows and unicorns. But I was glad to, because I don't like to see Bitcoin get a bad rep from younger people who are thinking like, oh, I'm not welcome in Bitcoin. People think that like, oh, I'm not welcome to develop in Bitcoin.
I mean, there's also a technological component here. People were building applications on a system that didn't scale. And if you're building an application on a system that doesn't scale, eventually you hit the wall and you say, oh, wait, my application that I thought was just going to be a fun application and people are going to only spend a penny on transaction fees or something. Now they have to spend $5 on transaction fees. Now, they have to wait forever. I put in all this effort in building this app. And because the platform can't scale, that means my app can't scale. Whereas if you build on Lightning, I think the appeal is people see it doesn't really matter how many users I get. The more and more users I get, the only people who are involved in this transaction are a very small number of people who are involved in routing the transaction. And because there's only the small number of people, that makes it more scalable. I can add more users, and I never hit this wall.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I see that the Ethereum people have got some side chains and stuff for focusing on adoption through second layers and side chains. But I'm just glad to see Bitcoin competing there in the developer space, the app developer space now, because it kind of made me feel a little bit anxious before about long-term, like developers feeling like Ethereum was the place they had to go if they wanted to build apps with cryptocurrency or with blockchains. But now I'm glad to see a developer community really strongly developing around apps and like an inclusive, sort of friendly, exciting developer community where there's like SDKs being developed and APIs and all that for game developers and everything. Because it was really starting to make me feel like, oh shit, maybe Bitcoin is going to lose that use case to Ethereum. Maybe all the games are going to actually go on Ethereum instead of Bitcoin. But now it's great to see that it's coming back, and we still got a lot to mind share to grab back from game developers and stuff, because they're all still in that mode of like, oh, if you're going to put a game asset on a blockchain, it has to be on OpenSea, on Ethereum, and all this. But I think like whether or not Bitcoin even wins that use case, it's kind of irrelevant. Obviously, it's good if Bitcoin Lightning Network gets that use case, but it's not going to make or break Bitcoin as a value proposition.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, this is just kind of like extra wins. So we already are very focused on getting the win of let's make a new currency. And that's what's important, not like how many games do we have on Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Do we have a currency that works for everybody in the world? But once we do have that, it provides a platform itself for people to say, I'm an indie game developer living in Bangladesh or something. And do I have access to the same financial market that everybody else in the world does? And can I make a great game that then people in Norway can download and pay me for? If you have a currency that's ubiquitous, that allows you to be able to do that, as long as it's scalable. Yeah.
In terms of that, like talking about developers and like, I'm in this other country and I'm trying to like build on Bitcoin Lightning and stuff. There was a huge focus of tooling around Ethereum in 2017. And that, I think, was one of the things that brought a lot of developers into Ethereum. They had all these conventions and all this stuff, developer-focused conventions and stuff, and they had all these tools built. So recently there was the LDK announced that Square Crypto is working on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they had a lot of funding in general. So they had a lot of marketing funding. They had a slick website. And that's kind of like the pattern of the ICO is that you raise a bunch of money in the beginning, and then you're able to create this foundation, or you're able to create big ad spends. You're able to like hire researchers. That kind of gives you this big head start. You're just printing money for yourself. Now you can pay for all these things. But with Bitcoin, we have to kind of be scrappier and more self-sufficient. There are companies who are funding kind of like independent work like Square and Blockstream, Lightning Labs. We're publishing open source software, but it's we're not drawing down this massive ICO fund. I think if you like put them like head to head at the start, it's going to look like the other side is like way overpowering. But if we build sustainable businesses and if we have sustainable technology that like actually works and like that we have companies that actually are making money on this stuff, then it doesn't matter how much money you raised at the start. Like down the road in a few years, unless you can continue to make new ICOs, and so meaning you can find new suckers who you can get money from them. The people who like kind of were going slow and steady, they're going to win that race.
Yeah, and like the perfect example of that difference between the FOMOnomics of the Ethereum companies and the fundamentals of the Bitcoin companies is the size of the raises and the size of the valuations at the same time. When Lightning Labs did the first raise, I think it was like a 2 million valuation or something really small, like maybe $1 million raised on the first round, a couple million, maybe 5 million valuation. And like similar projects on Ethereum were raising like $50 million with a $500 million valuation. It was just insane bubble FOMO mentality. But the Lightning Labs folks were down to earth with their valuations, not trying to raise as much money as they possibly could, because they could have. They could have raised a shitload of money in that first round. And even in the second round that was just announced, they could have raised more money, but they're being conservative. They're going more from like a fundamentals perspective. I'm just glad to see that that's the pattern that Bitcoin companies are on versus the crypto companies and the Ethereum companies that are just totally using out of this world valuations and raising obscene amounts of money that they don't need and that they end up losing or wasting or holding until it goes to zero. Like I talked on the episode with Udi Wertheimer about the DeFi episode where Status IM had raised something insane like $1 million or $100 million in their ICO, and then they just recently raised like another 500K or a million to keep going. So somehow they lost $100 million in 2 years.
Yeah, the market will figure this out. It's not as if they're just inventing money from nowhere. It's some people are parting with that money, and when they don't see returns, they're not going to come back for round two. So if you focus on actually being able to deliver on the amount that is being raised, then you can keep going back and then you can grow into becoming a sustainable business.
So these companies like your company Lightning Labs and like Square Crypto, like can you tell me what you think the LDK that Square Crypto is working on is going to help with, and what's the point of that? I mean, I should probably interview them, but what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think like the benefit of Lightning Protocol is that it's not owned by any one company, right? And I think that's what's attracting people to the platform. There's other ways that we could scale Bitcoin. We could do, closed platforms. We could do custodial solutions. Those already exist. But the thing that really makes people interested in Lightning is that, there's nobody who owns that. Like if I go and develop on it, I'm developing as an equal partner with everybody else on there. There's also like a big variety of developers, who have different needs and have different ideas of how they can use Lightning. And that's something that I was thinking about for the wallets as well. Like we don't know exactly what's going to work. We need developers to try different things and we need users to experiment with different things. And that's just a process that takes time and like effort from these different people. LDK is using Matt Corallo's Rust Lightning project, which he's been working on a while. And the focus of that is to kind of make it so that you can, as an existing Bitcoin developer, you can kind of integrate Lightning like tightly into your existing applications, or you can use Lightning in ways that are very custom to your particular use case. Lightning Labs, we produce LND, which is kind of like an all-in-one solution. It does everything. And there's some limitations there, meaning that because it's, it just works right out of the box, you aren't able to make everything work exactly as you exactly would want it to.
Are they like similar things or?
So theirs is more like a library that you would integrate, and ours is more like an application that you would run.
But are they providing similar tooling or whatever?
They both interact with Lightning. protocol. Although theirs is kind of like in an earlier stage. Like we've been, running on mainnet for a long time, and their system doesn't really have, like public mainnet support, and there's a lot of things that you have to build in order to like make it usable. But in general, it's the same concept. We're trying to talk the same protocol.
So it's like an SDK versus an API. Is that kind of?
Yeah, yeah. It's an SDK that you can build deeply into your apps, and you can make more like custom versions of what you want the Lightning wallets to look like.
Kind of going back a little bit to what we had kind of discussed a little earlier about the coin. Lightning doesn't have a coin. Lightning is an extension of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the fuel. It's the thing. Bitcoin. You're using Bitcoin on Lightning Network. You're not using Lightning coins. It's actual Bitcoin that's locked up in an on-chain transaction in a smart contract that you're then extending into a second layer that has more privacy and has more scalability.
You're working with a peer. Like all Bitcoins that you ever have are locked into a smart contract.
Yeah.
This is kind of like a smart contract with an extension, with a peer-to-peer extension. You join into a peer-to-peer network.